Before it became a cult classic, The Toxic Avenger was a massive flop that almost disappeared forever, until midnight moviegoers discovered its bizarre blend of environmental satire, grotesque gore, and a mutant hero who'd make you believe even toxic waste can have a heart. From future Oscar winners hiding in deleted scenes to real homeless men offering drinks to the monster, this low-budget splatter masterpiece has secrets as twisted as its melting-faced protagonist. Here are 15 weird facts you didn't know about The Toxic Avenger. Fact 1. The film failed initially, then became a cult hit. When The Toxic Avenger first hit theaters in 1984, it was a complete disaster at the box office. Trauma Entertainment had poured their heart and soul into what they hoped would be their breakout horror film, but audiences simply weren't interested. The movie received an early review from Variety in late December of 1984, but it did little to help the film gain traction with mainstream moviegoers. For most films, this kind of initial failure would have spelled the end, with the movie quickly disappearing into obscurity and never being heard from again. However, The Toxic Avenger had a strange second chance at life that nobody could have predicted. During 1985, the film began a long run as a midnight movie at the Bleecker Street Cinema in New York City, one of the most famous independent theaters in Greenwich Village. Midnight movies were a special phenomenon during this era, where cult film enthusiasts would gather late at night to watch bizarre, unconventional films that didn't fit into mainstream cinema. The Bleecker Street Cinema was known for championing these kinds of underground movies, and The Toxic Avenger found its perfect audience there. Night after night, crowds of midnight moviegoers packed the single-screen theater to watch Toxie's grotesque adventures. And something remarkable started to happen. Word of mouth spread like wildfire throughout New York City and beyond, with fans telling their friends about this outrageous, over-the-top superhero splatter film that mixed extreme violence with surprising heart and environmental satire. The midnight screenings continued for months, building a dedicated cult, following that transformed the film's reputation completely. By April 4, 1986, the film finally opened on 45 screens for a proper theatrical release, earning $140,000 during its opening weekend. While that might not sound like much compared to major Hollywood releases, it was a significant achievement for an independent film that had previously bombed. According to Lloyd Kaufman himself, by 1989, The Toxic Avenger had earned more than $15 million through a combination of box office receipts, home video sales and rentals, and television licensing deals. What started as a complete failure had become Trauma Entertainment's biggest success story and launched an entire franchise. Fact 2. The head-crushing scene was based on real trauma. One of the most shocking moments in The Toxic Avenger happens early in the film when a group of sadistic bullies deliberately run over a young child on a bicycle, crushing his head under the wheels of their car. It's an incredibly disturbing scene that sets the tone for just how dark and extreme this movie is willing to go. But what many viewers don't know is that this infamous moment came from a very real and traumatic memory from director Lloyd Kaufman's own childhood. Kaufman has openly discussed in interviews and in his book that the scene was inspired by an incident from his youth when he was backing a car out of his family's garage and accidentally hit his younger sister with the vehicle. Fortunately, his sister wasn't seriously injured in the accident, but the memory of what happened and the sheer terror he felt in that moment stayed with Kaufman for years afterward. The guilt and fear from that childhood mistake haunted him well into adulthood, and when he was creating The Toxic Avenger, he decided to channel those dark feelings into one of the film's most memorable and brutal sequences. What makes this even more interesting is how Kaufman transformed a personal trauma into something deliberately over the top and exaggerated for the screen. In the movie, the bullies aren't just careless drivers who accidentally hit someone, they're actively hunting pedestrians for sport and keeping score of how many points each victim is worth, with a child on a bike being the highest value target. After hitting the boy, they actually reverse the car to make sure they finish the job, all while laughing and taking photographs of the carnage. It's grotesque and deliberately shocking, designed to make the audience hate these characters so much that when the Toxic Avenger eventually gets his revenge on them, viewers will cheer for every brutal death. By taking his own guilt and fear from that garage incident and amplifying it into something cartoonishly evil, Kaufman created one of the most notorious scenes in cult horror history, while also working through his own psychological baggage in the process. Fact 3. Future Oscar winner. Marisa Tomei had an uncredited cameo. Before she became a household name and won an Academy Award, Marisa Tomei had a brief blink-and-you-miss-it appearance in The Toxic Avenger that most viewers never even knew existed. In the film's director's cut, Tomei appears as an uncredited health club girl during the chaotic scene where Melvin runs away from the pool after being humiliated by the bullies. She's wearing a pink and blue striped towel and can be seen screaming as Melvin frantically flees through the health club before jumping out the window and landing in the toxic waste that transforms him into the monster hero. The role was so minor and went by so quickly that Tomei doesn't even have a single line of dialogue in the entire sequence. What makes this cameo particularly interesting is that it represents one of Marisa Tomei's very first film roles, shot when she was just starting out in Hollywood in 1984. That same year, she also appeared in her debut film, The Flamingo Kid, alongside Matt Dillon, which gave her slightly more screen time and helped launch her career. However, her appearance in The Toxic Avenger was so brief and insignificant that it didn't even make it into the original theatrical cut of the movie. The scene only became visible years later when Trauma released the director's cut on home video, giving eagle-eyed fans a chance to spot the future star in her early days. The timing of this discovery became even more remarkable after Tomei won the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress in 1993 for her unforgettable performance as Mona Lisa Vito in My Cousin Vinny. Suddenly, Trauma fans realized they had been watching an Oscar winner in one of the trashiest cult films ever made. Director Lloyd Kaufman himself has proudly mentioned Tomei's appearance in interviews, claiming that The Toxic Avenger was her first movie role, though this is technically debatable since The Flamingo Kid was released the same year. Regardless, it remains a fascinating piece of trivia that connects lowbrow cult cinema with Hollywood prestige in the most unexpected way possible. Fact 4. Vincent D'Onofrio was fired before filming began. Before, Vincent D'Onofrio became known for his intense performances in films like Full Metal Jacket and his role as Detective Robert Gorin on Law and Order: Criminal Intent. He was just another young actor trying to break into the industry in the early 1980s. In 1983, during the pre-production phase of The Toxic Avenger, D'Onofrio landed what seemed like a promising role as Bozo, one of the film's main antagonists who terrorizes the nerdy janitor Melvin and eventually drives him into the vat of toxic waste that creates the monster hero. For a young actor working with the independent studio Trauma Entertainment, known for their shoestring budgets and guerrilla filmmaking style, this should have been an opportunity to gain experience and build his resume, even if the pay wasn't particularly impressive. However, D'Onofrio apparently felt the role deserved better compensation and made a decision that would cost him the part before filming even began. According to reports from Lloyd Kaufman and the production team, the young actor boldly asked for a pay raise before a single frame of film had been shot. This request didn't sit well with the notoriously budget-conscious Trauma producers who were already stretching every dollar to make their $500,000 budget work. Rather than negotiate or try to find middle ground, the producers made a swift decision and fired D'Onofrio on the spot, replacing him with actor Gary Schneider, who went on to play the role in the finished film. The irony of this situation isn't lost on anyone familiar with D'Onofrio's later career, as he went on to become a highly respected character actor with roles in major Hollywood productions, while The Toxic Avenger became a cult classic that launched Trauma's reputation but didn't exactly make anyone rich. Gary Schneider delivered a memorable performance as the sadistic Bozo, making the character one of the most hateable villains in the film. but it's fascinating to imagine how D'Onofrio might have approached the role with his signature intensity. Fact 5. The blind character laughs at visual gags. One of the most glaring continuity errors in The Toxic Avenger happens during what should be one of the movie's sweetest moments, and it involves Sarah, the blind woman who becomes Toxie's love interest. During a romantic montage showing the couple enjoying time together, there's a scene where Toxie playfully picks up a traffic pylon and puts it on his head like a silly hat, and Sarah bursts into laughter at the visual joke. The problem is pretty obvious when you think about it for even a second. Sarah's character is completely blind, so there's absolutely no way she could have seen Toxie's goofy gesture to laugh at it. This isn't just a minor slip that eagle-eyed viewers might catch on repeated watches. It's actually listed on the movie's official trivia pages and goofs sections because it's such an obvious mistake that breaks the logic of her character. Sarah's blindness is a crucial part of the story, and one of the reasons their romance works in the first place, because she literally cannot see Toxie's hideously deformed appearance and loves him for who he is on the inside, rather than judging him by his monstrous looks. The film goes out of its way to establish that she relies on her guide dog and cannot perceive visual information, making this moment where she somehow reacts to a purely visual gag even more bizarre. What makes this error especially interesting is that it suggests the filmmakers were either so focused on creating a feel-good montage that they forgot about Sarah's disability in that particular moment. Or perhaps they shot multiple takes with different actresses or scenarios and accidentally left in footage that didn't match the character's established limitations. Given that The Toxic Avenger was made on an extremely tight budget of just $500,000 with a rushed production schedule, it's entirely possible that continuity checks simply fell through the cracks during editing. Some fans have jokingly speculated that maybe Sarah wasn't actually blind and was just pretending the whole time, though the movie clearly establishes her blindness as genuine throughout the rest of the film. Fact 6. 3 different people played the Toxic Avenger. When you watch The Toxic Avenger, you might think you're seeing one actor's performance from start to finish, but the reality is much more complicated than that. The character of Melvin / The Toxic Avenger was actually split between 3 completely different people, each handling a separate aspect of bringing this mutant hero to life on screen. Before Melvin falls into that vat of toxic waste and transforms into the monster we all know, he's played by Mark Torgl, who brings the scrawny janitor to life with his awkward mannerisms and nerdy charm. Torgl was perfect for the role of the pre-transformation Melvin because he had that natural underdog quality that made audiences root for him even when he was being humiliated by the health club bullies. His performance in those early scenes sets up everything that comes after, making you understand why this guy deserves to become a superhero. But once Melvin takes that fateful plunge into the barrel of toxic chemicals and emerges as the hideously deformed creature of superhuman size and strength, a completely different actor takes over. That's when Mitch Cohen steps in to physically portray the mutated Toxic Avenger, wearing the heavy monster costume and makeup throughout the rest of the film. Cohen was chosen specifically because of his size and physical presence, which was essential for making Toxie look intimidating and powerful on screen. He had to perform all the action sequences, the fight scenes, and even the tender romantic moments with Sarah while buried under pounds of prosthetics and makeup. And then there's the third piece of this puzzle, which is Kenneth Kessler, providing the voice of the Toxic Avenger. Kessler brought that surprisingly gentle and warm tone to Toxie's dialogue, which created an interesting contrast between the monster's brutal appearance and his kind-hearted personality. What makes Kessler's involvement even more unusual is that he was born way back in 1920 and had spent most of his career working behind the scenes as an assistant director and production manager on films from the 1940s and 50s, making this voice role a very unexpected late career turn for him. Fact 7. A homeless man mistook the costume for real burns. During the filming of The Toxic Avenger in 1984, actor Mitch Cohen experienced one of the most unexpectedly touching moments of the entire production while wearing his full monster makeup in a location called Shinbone Alley. Cohen had been cast to play the transformed version of Melvin, the mutant hero who emerges after falling into toxic waste, and his costume was designed to look genuinely disturbing with melted, disfigured skin and grotesque features that made him appear as though he had suffered terrible burns. The makeup was so realistic and unsettling that it fooled more than just movie audiences. While the crew was setting up for one of the film's action sequences in this gritty New Jersey location, a homeless man who had been living in the area approached Cohen during a break between takes. According to Cohen's own recollection of the incident, the man walked up to him with genuine concern and compassion in his eyes, clearly believing that the actor was actually a homeless burn victim like himself who had suffered some horrific accident. The homeless man, moved by what he thought was a fellow person in need, offered Cohen a drink from whatever he had on him at the time, extending a simple act of kindness to someone he believed was even worse off than himself. This unexpected encounter highlights just how effective the low-budget practical effects work was on The Toxic Avenger, created by makeup artist Jennifer Aspinall, who managed to craft something so believable that it could be mistaken for real injuries even in broad daylight and up close. The moment also revealed something profound about the human capacity for empathy, as this stranger was willing to share what little he had with someone he thought was suffering. For Cohen, who was simply trying to take a break from the grueling shoot in full monster costume, the experience became one of the most memorable and humbling moments of working on the film, reminding everyone involved that the grotesque makeup they created was far more convincing than they might have realized. Fact 8. The film's title changed at the last minute. Here's something that confused audiences for decades. If you actually watch the 1984 original film from start to finish, you'll notice that nobody ever calls the main character the Toxic Avenger. Not once. Throughout the entire movie, he's only referred to as the Monster Hero, which sounds like a placeholder name that somehow made it into the final cut. And that's essentially what happened, because the film wasn't actually called The Toxic Avenger during production at all. Director Lloyd Kaufman later revealed in his book, All I Needed to Know About Filmmaking I Learned from The Toxic Avenger, that the movie's working title was simply The Monster Hero, and that's what everyone called it while they were making the film. The cast learned their lines with that name, the script used that name, and Mitch Cohen spent weeks in that uncomfortable monster suit, thinking he was playing a character called the Monster Hero. The change to The Toxic Avenger only happened at the absolute last minute, literally as they were preparing to release the film to theaters. By that point, it was far too late to go back and re-record all the dialogue or add new voiceover lines calling him by his new name. The filmmakers were working with a tiny budget of around $500,000, and there simply wasn't money or time to fix this kind of issue. So they made the practical decision to just leave all the dialogue as it was, even though the marquee and posters would be advertising a character name that never appears in the actual movie. This created a strange disconnect that became part of the film's quirky charm. The character was consistently called the Toxic Avenger, or Toxie, in all three sequels that followed, in the animated TV series Toxic Crusaders, and in every piece of merchandise. But in that original cult classic film, he remains the monster hero from beginning to end, a permanent reminder of the chaotic, seat-of-your-pants filmmaking process that defined Trauma Entertainment's scrappy approach to independent cinema. Fact 9. It was made for only $500,000. The Toxic Avenger was made on what even by 1984 standards was an incredibly tight budget of just $500,000, which translates to roughly $1.5 million in today's money. To put that in perspective, major studio films at the time were spending tens of millions, and even other low-budget horror movies typically had more resources to work with. Lloyd Kaufman and Michael Hertz at Trauma Entertainment had to get extremely creative with every single dollar they spent, and that shoestring budget is actually part of what gives the film its distinctive rough-around-the-edges charm that fans have come to love. The entire production was filmed in and around Boonton, New Jersey, with additional scenes shot in Jersey City, keeping everything local to save on travel and location costs. The filmmakers relied heavily on practical effects rather than expensive special effects technology, which meant getting inventive with household items and simple materials to create the movie's memorable gore sequences. The toxic waste barrels were just regular drums. The monster makeup was crafted by hand, using basic prosthetics and paint. And many of the film's most shocking death scenes were accomplished using simple tricks, like the melon filled with corn syrup for the head-crushing moment. Kaufman and his team employed guerrilla filmmaking techniques throughout the shoot, often filming quickly in public locations without extensive permits or elaborate setups. This gave the movie an authentic, gritty documentary-like quality that actually worked in its favor, making the fictional town of Traumaville feel like a real decaying New Jersey community. The cast was largely made up of local actors and non-professionals who worked for minimal pay, and many crew members wore multiple hats to keep personnel costs down. Despite these severe financial limitations, or perhaps because of them, the Toxic Avenger managed to create something truly unique that stood out from both big-budget Hollywood productions and other independent films of its era. The movie proved that creativity and determination could stretch a small budget remarkably far when filmmakers were willing to embrace limitations rather than fight against them. Fact 10. The child head effect. Used a melon. One of the most shocking and controversial moments in The Toxic Avenger happens early in the film when a group of psychotic health club bullies deliberately run over a young boy riding his bicycle. And the scene doesn't just show the impact, but graphically depicts the child's head being crushed under the car's tire. For a movie made in 1984 with a budget of only around $500,000, the filmmakers needed to find an extremely cheap yet effective way to create this disturbing visual effect, and their solution was surprisingly simple and ingenious. The special effects team took an ordinary melon from a grocery store and injected it with corn syrup mixed with red food dye to simulate blood and brain matter. Then they carefully fitted the melon with a child's wig to make it look like a human head with hair. Once the melon was properly dressed up, they mounted it onto a dummy body dressed in children's clothing and positioned it on the street where the car would roll over it during filming. When the vehicle's tire made contact with the melon during the actual take, the fruit exploded in a spray of red liquid and pulpy chunks that looked disturbingly realistic on camera, creating one of the most memorable and unsettling practical effects in the entire movie. Despite being created with such basic household materials, the effect proved to be highly effective and genuinely disturbing to audiences. So much so that the scene became one of the most talked about moments in the film and contributed significantly to its reputation for extreme violence. The simplicity of using a melon highlights how creative low-budget filmmaking can be when talented effects artists work within severe financial constraints. And it also demonstrates Trauma Entertainment's willingness to push boundaries and create shocking imagery that would cement the Toxic Avenger status as a cult classic known for its over-the-top gore and dark humor that somehow managed to be both horrifying and cartoonish at the same time. Fact 11. An actor with one arm played. Frank. One of the most fascinating casting choices in The Toxic Avenger involved the character of Frank, the knife-wielding leader of the criminal trio who terrorizes the Mexican restaurant in one of the film's most memorable scenes. Frank was played by actor Larry Sultan, and what makes this particularly interesting is that Sultan only had one arm in real life. His right arm, which appears throughout the scene as he menaces the blind character Sarah and her seeing-eye dog, is actually a prosthetic limb. This detail is easy to miss on first viewing because the prosthetic work was convincing enough that most audiences never noticed anything unusual about the character. Sultan handles the knife and moves through the scene with such confidence that the artificial arm blends seamlessly into his performance. During the Mexican restaurant sequence, Frank is part of a three-person gang that includes Leroy and Rico, and they're shown threatening patrons and eventually attempting to assault Sarah before the Toxic Avenger arrives to dispense his brutal brand of justice. The casting decision reflects Trauma Entertainment's practical approach to filmmaking, where they often worked with whoever was available and willing to participate in their low-budget productions. Rather than seeing Sultan's physical difference as a limitation, the filmmakers simply cast him in the role and worked with what they had. The prosthetic arm was functional enough for the scene's requirements, and Sultan's performance brought the necessary menace to the character. This is just one example of how the Toxic Avengers production embraced an anything-goes mentality, incorporating real-life circumstances into the film without drawing attention to them or making them part of the story. Frank meets a particularly gruesome end when the Toxic Avenger rips off his arm and then stuffs him into an oven, baking him alive in one of the movie's many over-the-top death sequences. The scene remains one of the film's most notorious moments, and few viewers realize they're watching an actor with a prosthetic limb playing a character who loses that very limb in the most violent way possible. Fact 12. A homeless man stole a prop gun and threatened the crew. Low-budget filmmaking often means shooting in less-than-ideal locations, and the Toxic Avenger learned this lesson the hard way when a dangerous incident occurred during production in 1983. While filming scenes in Shinbone Alley, a gritty urban location in New Jersey, the crew experienced an unexpected and frightening interruption that had nothing to do with the scripted action. According to reports from the production, a homeless man managed to get into one of the equipment trailers that the crew had set up near the filming location. The trailers contained various props and equipment needed for the movie, including several prop weapons that were being used for the action sequences. The man found one of these prop guns and took it without anyone immediately noticing. What happened next turned a typical day of filming into a tense real-world situation. The homeless individual, now armed with what appeared to be a real weapon, approached members of the cast and crew and began threatening them. For those on set, there was no way to immediately know whether the gun was just a harmless movie prop or something more dangerous, creating a genuinely frightening moment during production. This incident highlights the challenges that independent filmmakers like Lloyd Kaufman and Michael Hertz faced while making the Toxic Avenger on an extremely tight budget. Shooting on location in rough urban areas meant dealing with unpredictable circumstances and potential security issues that big-budget Hollywood productions would never encounter. The crew didn't have the luxury of closed sets, extensive security teams, or controlled environments. Instead, they were filming guerrilla style in real neighborhoods where anything could happen. While specific details about how the situation was ultimately resolved haven't been widely documented, the crew managed to complete filming despite this alarming interruption. The incident became one of many behind-the-scenes stories that illustrated just how scrappy and resourceful the Trauma team had to be to get their movie made, dealing with real-world dangers that were sometimes more intense than anything in the script itself. Fact 13. The voice actor was a 1940s film industry veteran. When you watch The Toxic Avenger, you hear the monster hero's voice delivered in a surprisingly warm and gentle tone that contrasts sharply with his grotesque appearance. That voice belonged to Kenneth Kessler, a man whose career in Hollywood stretched back to an era when the film industry looked completely different from the low-budget independent scene that created this cult classic. Kessler was born on November 6, 1920, in San Francisco, California, which means he was already 64 years old when he lent his voice to Toxie in 1984. For most of his professional life, Kessler worked behind the scenes in the film industry rather than in front of a microphone. Throughout the 1940s and 1950s, he built his career as an assistant director and production manager on various Hollywood productions. His credits from that era include films like The Rebel Set from 1959 and Apology for Murder from 1945, working in the technical and organizational side of filmmaking during Hollywood's golden age. This background made his role in the Toxic Avenger particularly unusual, since voice acting was not his typical area of work, and the film itself represented a completely different kind of cinema than the mainstream productions he had spent decades helping to create. The decision to use Kessler's voice proved to be one of the film's most effective creative choices. His delivery gave the character an almost grandfatherly quality that made the Toxic Avenger feel sympathetic, despite his monstrous appearance and violent methods of dealing with criminals. The gentle, almost reassuring tone of his voice helped audiences connect with the character on an emotional level, turning what could have been just another scary monster into a genuinely likable hero. Kessler's work on the Toxic Avenger was one of only 2 voice acting roles in his entire career, with the other being the 1986 film Monster in the Closet. He passed away on January 31, 1989, in Davie, Florida, just 5 years after bringing Toxie's voice to life and helping create one of cult cinema's most beloved characters. Fact 14. The sequels were one film split in 2. When Lloyd Kaufman and Michael Hertz decided to make a sequel to The Toxic Avenger, they had big ambitions that ended up creating an unexpected problem. The production team traveled all the way to Tokyo, Japan, to film what was supposed to be a single follow-up movie, marking a huge step up from the original film's New Jersey locations. But as cameras rolled and scenes piled up, Kaufman realized they had shot far more footage than could fit into one coherent film, and the decision to split everything into 2 separate movies created one of the strangest production stories in Trauma's history. The original plan was straightforward enough: create one ambitious sequel that would take Toxie on an international adventure. With an estimated budget of around $2.5 million, Part 2 became Trauma's most expensive film at the time, allowing for more elaborate creature designs, improved makeup effects, and those international shooting locations in both Tokyo and New York City. However, the production spiraled as the crew filmed scene after scene, gathering hours and hours of footage that told multiple storylines and featured numerous elaborate set pieces. When Kaufman sat down in the editing room, he faced a dilemma. The material was simply too long and unfocused to work as a single movie. Rather than waste all the extra footage or spend more money on reshoots, Kaufman made the practical decision to reframe the remaining material into a completely new storyline. The unused scenes from Part 2 were combined with additional footage shot back in New York and New Jersey to create Part 3. The Last Temptation of Toxie. Both films were released in 1989, just months apart, which confused audiences who expected traditional sequels. This patchwork approach resulted in 2 movies that share actors, locations, and even some plot elements, but tell different stories. Kaufman himself has acknowledged the inconsistencies and tonal shifts in Part 3, often joking about how the film was essentially assembled from leftover pieces. But fans of Trauma's chaotic style have embraced these quirks as part of the franchise's charm. Fact 15. It spawned an Emmy-winning makeup artist's career. When you watch The Toxic Avenger and see that grotesque, melting-faced monster hero stumbling around Traumaville, you're looking at the early work of someone who would go on to become one of Hollywood's most celebrated makeup artists. Jennifer Aspinall was the special makeup effects artist responsible for creating Toxie's iconic deformed look, and her work on this 1984 low-budget horror comedy became the launching pad for an incredibly successful career in the entertainment industry. Working with Trauma Entertainment's tiny budget of just $500,000, Aspinall had to get creative with limited resources to transform actor Mitch Cohen into the hideously deformed creature of superhuman size and strength. The makeup she designed featured sunken eye sockets, severely disfigured facial features, and that signature melted appearance that made Toxie both terrifying and somehow endearing to audiences. Despite the financial constraints, Aspinall's practical effects work was effective enough to help the film build its cult following after it found success at midnight screenings in New York City. After The Toxic Avenger, Aspinall's career took off in ways that nobody working on that scrappy independent film could have predicted. She went on to work on the sketch comedy show Mad TV, where her makeup artistry earned her Emmy Awards for her outstanding work. The jump from creating a toxic mutant superhero in a trauma exploitation film to winning television's highest honor shows just how talented Aspinall was from the very beginning of her career. Her success continued into more recent years when she worked on the Hulu limited series Pam and Tommy, the show about Pamela Anderson and Tommy Lee that starred Lily James and Sebastian Stan. Once again, Aspinall's makeup work was recognized with Emmy Awards, proving that the skills she honed while working on low-budget indie horror films in the early 1980s translated perfectly to high-profile prestige television projects. The fact that Toxie's gruesome appearance was crafted by someone who would become an Emmy-winning artist adds another layer of legitimacy to the Toxic Avenger's legacy as more than just trashy cult cinema.